Hi, this is Michael Fenn, re-recording the first session of my Eco-Spirituality series. And so the first session of this Nature and Spirituality series is called Boundary. So a little bit about this series for those of you who were able to make it in person and are watching this online for the first time. This series will explore how nature affects spirituality through three different avenues. Through the books Gathering Moss and Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, through my own experience in science and with these books, and through discussion of our own experience with nature, science, and spirituality. So this series is structured in multiple sessions that are interrelated, but each can definitely stand alone. So if you miss one, don't feel like you have broken the link of the series. You can come to the next one with no loss. And generally speaking, I will probably be focusing more on Gathering Moss than Braiding Sweetgrass, both because I found it more impactful to me and it is my own study area in biology. So who am I? I thought I would give a little introduction to myself about why I'm doing this. So I graduated from Clark University back in May of last year with a bachelor's degree in biology, where I focused primarily on evolution, ecology, and botany. And I did an undergraduate independent study in the evolution, physiology, and ecology of bryophytes, which is a fancy Latin name for mosses and some related species. Who is Robin Wall Kimmerer? So as I mentioned before, she is the author of Gathering Moss and Braiding Sweetgrass, and a third book, A Democracy of Species, that I had not had the chance to read yet. Aside from that, and before that, she was a bryophyte ecologist and groundbreaking scientist. She actually contributed to a very important ecological concept called the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, which is very cool and worth a Google if you have the chance. She's also a member of the Potawatomi Nation, so she brings her own spirituality from that indigenous tradition to these books. And she, in addition to all of that, she is a professor in the College of Environmental Science and Forestry at SUNY. So what are these books, Gathering Moss and Braiding Sweetgrass? So Gathering Moss was published in 2003. It's her first book, and it blends personal memoir, bryophyte science, and spiritual experiences, and it's much shorter and more concise than Braiding Sweetgrass. Braiding Sweetgrass was published 10 years later in 2013, and it's a blend, again, of a personal memoir, but it incorporates wider ecology and even ethnobotanical matters, which is a fancy way of saying the history of interaction between humans and plants, and also includes spiritual experiences. Braiding Sweetgrass is much more drawn out and much more heavily structured than Gathering Moss. And yeah, so those are the two books that I will be inspired by and drawing from throughout this series. So now that sort of the introductions are out of the way, I will get into sort of the quote-unquote meat of this session, which is sort of, I guess, why are mosses small? We will learn why the session is called Boundary. So I say why are mosses small, but it's important to know that that is a misleading question because there is no why in evolution. So evolution is a series of natural experiments that either work or do not work via success and reproduction, without any kind of intention or goal. So again, that's not a great question, it's very misleading, but I didn't have a good segue. So mosses sort of are small because they lack an ability to transport water through their bodies. As you may know, larger plants like trees, bushes, and even grasses have something called a xylem and phloem that allow them to send water from their roots to their leaves and branches. And without that ability, mosses restrict their size to best accommodate this type of physiology where their bodies are so small that they don't actually need to transport water through their bodies. Mosses are also small because they have no cuticle, which in other plants is the waxy layer that you can feel on houseplants and grasses and maple leaves and things like that. And that helps these plants to retain water in their tissues. Mosses, having none, have turned to a quirk of physics to allow themselves to remain moist for the longest possible time, because they don't have that protection. This quirk is called manipulation of the laminar boundary, And essentially, what a laminar boundary is, essentially, is what occurs when air moves over a surface. So the less impediments this air has, the faster it can move, and thus wick away water. So various species of moths use their small stature to manipulate the flow of air above their bodies, either through their texture or through their absence of texture. And this also comes into play because mosses are small, they exist at a very low to the ground. And so the natural laminar boundary on a larger scale doesn't affect them as much because air closer to the ground has more impediments and so is slower moving, and so wicks away less water from their bodies. Mosses being small have also, as an advantage, gained access to many different environments that larger plants are barred access to. For instance, being small, mosses are less encumbered by gravity, and so can grow on vertical tree trunks and sheer cliff faces. And their small stature also allows them to access small habitats, like cracks in the sidewalk, leaves on trees, and even on the backs of certain beetles. Alright, so now I will touch upon my own experience of faith in this sort of boundary. So, as humans, when we encounter nature, we are very used to seeing big, we see animals and trees and mountains, and many scientists are also used to seeing small, bacteria, germs, etc. And even lay people are aware of the existence of these germs. However, almost nobody is used to seeing this in between, and this is the boundary where mosses live. We can see them with a naked eye, but to really see them, you need to be paying attention and to use magnification, but not magnification at the level of a microscope. So they exist at that weird intersection of macroscopic and microscopic. And this is where faith to me comes into play. When I seek and find these organisms that exist in the middle edge of my perception, encountering them either intentionally or unintentionally is an epiphany every single time it happens. When I approached over a decaying log in the woods, very carefully picking out the varied species of moss on the dead log, I'm in a very intimate knowledge and very intimate space with the creation. It puts me in a very direct dialogue with the Creator, to see and to somewhat understand as a large animal the lives and trials of these tiny inanimate green smudges that appear as much more upon scrutiny, is to go beyond myself in many ways. My scientific knowledge is only the very basic component. I know them much more closely as counterparts and specimens in these moments that I am in dialogue with the Creator. And then knowing, as another example, but walking through the woods and knowing where I may find certain species of moss or how long this log may have been decaying based on the mosses on it, or stopping to point out this lush carpet of polytrichum, which is a kind of moss, to a friend or family member, feels again to be in holy conversation with the Creator, and to allow other people into that dialogue is something holy to me. Yeah. And so I have a few quotes from the book Gathering Moss that I shared in the session that we spoke about, so I will share them with you now. So this quote is from, I believe the introduction to Gathering Moss. It says, "Every day we pass over them without seeing. Mosses and other small beings issue an invitation to dwell for a time right at the limits of ordinary perception. All it requires of us is attention, is attentiveness. Look in a certain way and a whole new world can be revealed." The second quote that I shared is again from Gathering Moss. It's from the first chapter, I believe. "A close encounter with a mossy log always makes me think of entering a fantasy fabric shop. Its windows overflow with rich textures and colors that invite you closer to inspect the bolts of cloth arrayed before you. You can run your fingertips over a silky drape of plagiothecium and finger the glossy Barthelorus brocade. There are dark woolly tufts of dicranum, sheets of golden brachythecium, and shining ribbons of neum. The yardage of nubbly brown calicladium tweed is shot through with gilt threads of campypilum. To pass hurriedly by without looking is like walking by the Mona Lisa chatting on a cell phone, oblivious." And then the final quote that I shared, that we discussed, says, "Just at the limits of ordinary perception lies another level in the hierarchy of beauty. of leaves as tiny and perfectly ordered as a snowflake, of unseen lives complex and beautiful. All it takes is attention and knowing how to look. I found mosses to be a vehicle for intimacy with the landscape, like a secret knowledge of the forest. And I definitely think this last quote speaks to me in that last part of being a vehicle for intimacy with the landscape. Speaks to me and speaks to how I view interaction with the landscape as a spiritual experience. And so, lastly, we didn't actually get time to talk about these reflection questions during the session, but something I'll share and hopefully you can be thinking about after we are done are these questions. So, how may you pursue searching in the boundary layer in both a literal and figurative sense? Could there be things in your faith life existing in the boundary layer that get overlooked? And the author and myself both blend science and faith. Where may you find connection between your vocation, your interests, your hobbies, and faith where it may be unexpected? And what do you seek in faith and in nature? Where is your attention? And that is the end of the session. Thank you for watching.